and I got a brother on a line with us right now that I admire, I looked up to as a kid, taught me a lot of things, man. And in this interview, I'm gonna let him tell you pretty much about himself. But anybody that know me, aside from what I'm doing now on a journalistic YouTube journalist tip, blogger tip, any of those things, that I actually wrote a book about this man right here. And his name is Javier Panama Card. And before I go into the things that I want to emphasize about him, I'm gonna just let him introduce himself. Then I remind you before he goes, he's humble. So certain things I'm gonna try to shake the cage with, but he done been in interrogation rooms, he done faced life sentences. He's not gonna crack. So I'm gonna try to get him to do whatever he can do and whatever he can do to safe. So Pete, without no further ado, oh, and one more thing. This is also the father of Paco Panama. Like I said the other night when I was talking about rappers from DC, you got rappers who create gimmicks and monikers like 50 Cent, Rick Ross, no disrespect to none of them. Somebody say they all these names. This dude took a name called Paco Panama, and Paco Panama's father. I mean, Panama is Paco Panama's father, so nobody should have a better right or more realistic, credible claim to say that they are Paco Panama, Panama their father. Now, without sounding like I'm slicing it up too much, Pete, introduce yourself the way you introduce yourself, bro.
Thank you, bro. Thank you for such a warm welcoming, and for me, it's a tremendous honor, a pleasure to be here with you, man. Because you and I, we've been through some serious trials and tribulations together. We've been in the belly of the beast, with no prospect of probably even seeing freedom again. So without further ado, like Eon said, my name is Javier Card. Most people in the city, in DC that is, know me as Panama. So that's how it became the Javier Panama Card thing. Eon has been very instrumental over the years in putting my story out there, my struggles, my trials. I had a pretty much what you could consider a high profile case in the city back in the early 90s, late 80s, when the government was experimenting with street crews in the Black communities, trying to implement some of those laws that they normally would implement with the mob. They started experimenting with those laws with us. I was one of those guinea pigs. And as a consequence of my trial in DC, at the culmination of it, I was sentenced to 96 years. That was reduced like a month later to 88 years. I was convicted. Basically, the government's theory was that I was the leader of a drug organization in the district. I also was facing another murder charge in New York State. And after I was sentenced in DC to the 88 years, I was transferred to New York, sorry, where I received an additional 26 and 2/3 to life, which in its totality added up to 113 years of life. At that point, to the world, I was dead. You know. Before we go any further, and then I'm allow Eon to so the conversation could flow. I don't want anyone that listen or see this interview to think that by no means we glorifying the lifestyle that we live, but it is what it is. We can't get around that part. I think what's more important now is to demonstrate who we are now in the direction that we're going. And we could still talk about the past because that's part of what makes me who I am today. That's part of what makes Paco who he is today, who he's becoming. And as well as Eon, because Eon walked in the same shoes that I walked in.
P, I appreciate you sitting down, man. And before I go into it though, P, can you explain? See, a lot of dudes that heard all the big time, D boys, gangsters go to prison and then they come home. Some may come home as rats. That don't got nothing to do with you. Some may come home as men like you, and then they kind of retire behind the scenes. Some fools even come home and ain't learned no lesson. We ain't gonna get into them, all right? But I don't think nobody fully understands how it is to come, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm gonna say to come out of the projects, the slums of Panama, crawl your way to some type of existence in the United States, right? By whatever means. Go to jail and get life sentences in multiple jurisdictions, never really have a hope of coming home. And then to come out of all that, right? And I'm setting the stage like this on purpose. And then to be deported back to Panama, where you haven't established any of these social circles that you built over here. Like you built yourself up, regardless of how you built yourself up, brother. Like I'm not getting into that, but you built yourself up to be, let's say, independent, okay? Let's just use
Right.
that word. Then you
Right.
go to prison, you don't tell, you survive, and you get out of prison. And they send you back to Panama. You know, they send you to an ice jump for 30 days, although you know you're going home, and they put you on a plane back to Panama. I know a couple buddies right now that have been deported to Jamaica. Shout out to Butch Book. What is it for a brother that was not a U.S. citizen? You were a foreign national. You did all that time, and you came home, and they just sent you back to your country. Much love to your country. I know you got Panamanian pride, but they sent you back to everything that you left to get up.
That's a very interesting question. And so I have a slightly different outlook on the whole deportation issue. And as I continue to elaborate on it, y'all gonna understand what I mean by that. So let's talk about what it feels like to come back to a country. For me, let's talk about my case in specific. I left Panama in 1986 at the age of 21, and I returned now in 2021. I returned, I believe, at the age of 56. Yeah. And it was a whole different country. It was a culture shock. Uh, the kids, the people that I grew up with, most of them are not around. The ones that are around, you hardly see them. The streets have changed. Not the language, but the way people communicate has changed. You know, with the whole technology advancements and social media, you know, the kids, everybody communicate differently now. So as much as I try to prepare myself while I was still in prison, you know, by way of self-educating and participating in socialization programs and all that type of stuff, uh, I think nothing fully prepares you to re-enter society after being in prison. Like in my case, I was in there for 3 decades, for 30 years. But to come back to another country is a whole different thing. So it's been a culture shock. Uh, One of the main obstacles that I've been facing is that Panama doesn't have a lot of reentry programs. You know, in the U.S., we have they have a huge criminal justice reform movement going on, and because of that, you know, it opens opportunities for people coming home. Down here, you on your own. You come home, you got to make it work the best way you can. Coming back home in your 50s, job employment opportunities are a little scarcer because of the age factor. Insurance is a little iffy because of the age factor. And if you have medical issues, that's another thing because, you know, so everything is working against you. So I'm in a position where I am compelled to establish my own brand and be entrepreneur, the same way we was entrepreneurs on the street. That's what people need to understand, that we always possess the skills to become Fortune 500 CEOs and all this other stuff. That's why you see a lot of these federal judges at sentencing, they use words like that when they're about to sentence a defendant. You could have been a CEO, you could have been a president, you could have been all type of things because we had all this ingenuity and creativity when we was moving them drugs and putting that working on the street, right? So now we take those skills along with everything that we had to use within ourselves to survive in the belly of the beast, and we come out here and we try to make it work. But I'm gonna tell you, it's 10 times harder than it would be if I would have got released in the US because it's like Eon said, I built my life up there. You know, I have all my resources, I have friends, I have families, I have kids, I got grandkids. But the beautiful thing about coming back home, now here's the flip side to my deportation story. As much as I knew that I was going to be facing these obstacles, I did want to be deported. And it was really because of my mother, because I'm my only child. And my mother, you know, is up in age. And the fact that she was going through certain things by herself was kind of like eating me alive in that cell for the last 10, 15 years of my incarceration. So I worked out the situation with my case in New York where I used the deportation to my advantage in the sense that I said to them through my lawyers, look, we don't have to keep going back and forth wasting taxpayers' dollars with this case, right? In a case where I didn't deny culpability, right? I don't have no co-defendants on that case. So it was in my best interest to accept responsibility and get the less included charge because it was one of those situations where I couldn't get around it and say, hey, it wasn't me because a jury or my peers would have felt like I was playing on their intelligence. So when it came towards the bitter end, in the way in which I obtained my freedom, I use the deportation to my advantage. Look, if y'all do this and I do that, I go in front of the parole board, I'm on my own, and I'm getting deported. You don't have to worry about me no more. I'm not going to be released on U.S. soil. And it worked to my advantage. But at the same time, I don't want y'all to misunderstand me. I wanted to come back to my mother. I wanted to come here and care for her. You know, it hasn't been easy, but I won't trade it when it comes to my mother. Yeah, best way.
Your mother lives in Panama, correct?
Correct.
You've been in federal institutions from the East Coast to the West Coast, correct?
That's right.
Can you take me, matter of fact, how many times has your mother visited you in the United States in prison?
Okay, at the beginning of the bid, my mother used to come up once a year for like the first, I'm going to say 15, 16 years, somewhere in that ballpark. She came up once a year and she would stay at least a month, 2 months in the US. And within that time frame, she'd come visit and my mom always been an entrepreneur. So she used to go up there and buy her supplies and stuff for the business that she had down here, set that up, ship it back. But her main objective
let me cut you off. Excuse me for being rude, but your mother a hustler, bro?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. I don't want to mess you up.
That's where I get it from. We could talk about that. We could talk about my upbringing, my you know, what are some of the things that made me who I am, for better or worse. But yeah, my mom came up like for the first, to answer your question directly, she came up like for the first 15, 16 years to visit me. And then it got to a place where, you know, she started getting up in age and she said, look, everybody believes that you're not never coming home, but I know you coming home. So I'm not coming back up here no more. I'm going to wait for you. And I know you're going to come home. It took me another 15 years, but I made it by the grace of God, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's a question for me though.
Right.
You know, I mean, which is like, if we wanted to, I'm gonna throw this out there too though, P. If we wanted to sit here and say, man, my man was this and my man was that, P, the article that I initially read about you for lack of inflammatory stuff, the Washington Post entitled it "A Trail of Bodies." So if we wanted to, bro, like we could get into all that aspect, but I'm not gonna present it from that angle. You know what I mean? I want to be different. So anyway, speeding along, where you come from, bro? What it was like in the Santa Cruz projects? Like, explain that to me in Panama at your young age and you coming up.
Well, I'm gonna share something that I don't think it may surprise you because you know my story in and out. But I think it may surprise a lot of the people who might be watching this. Is that normally when people hear of people coming from countries like Panama, they're associated with third world countries, they're associated with poverty, they're associated with hunger. And a lot of that is true because in every part of the world, there's a ghetto, like the ghetto boy said, right? But I'm gonna tell you how my association with Santa Cruz came. My stepfather had an apartment down there. Santa Cruz, first of all, is a project. That's the best way to describe it for anybody.
Just like in the US? Just
exactly.
Like in the US?
Exactly. So it was 4 tall buildings. But it was one of the most, it still is one of the most notorious hoods in the city. I'm from Panama City. There are quite a few notorious hoods. I'm not trying to say that Santa Cruz is more notorious, but it is. How I came to go down there is my stepfather had an apartment in the project where he had his kids from a previous relationship where their mother passed away. So these were my stepbrothers and stepsisters. So I used to go down there and spend weekends with them. And as far as I can remember as a child, I've always was extremely attracted to wrongdoing. Anything that meant going against societal norms, I was attracted to it. I have done some deep therapy sessions to try to get to the bottom of that. We still couldn't get to the bottom as to why I was so unswerving, because I had opportunities, bro. I don't have the type of story, the third world story that I was hungry, I didn't have no clothes, I didn't have no shoes. That's not my story. My mother is a hustler. You just said it. My mother made sure everything was straight. We didn't live in no mansion. We wasn't rich, but I never knew what it was to be hungry. I never knew what it was not to have clothes on my back. I attended private school. I was in karate school. I played soccer. I was a Boy Scout. But when I went out to play, I wanted to be with those kids. I wanted to be an outlaw. I wanted to be against societal rules, you know. So I just, from as far as I can remember, I've been getting in trouble, right? I was getting in trouble. I remember getting expelled in the third grade. Back then, that was kind of unheard of, you know. So that's how I came to come in Santa Cruz. And then that's how I met most of the dudes that was part of our team that came to the US, which became my family. But we started off down there doing juvenile delinquency stuff. You know, that hood was known for robbing tourists. Um, at that time, we saw tourists as they were all millionaires, right? Because ignorance is something else. You see white, especially if they're white, you say, oh man, they got a bunch of money. And we took pride in the fact that we didn't rob regular 9 to 5 people. Now, as a grown person, now we know that we were robbing probably regular 9 to 5 people that saved their money and came on vacation. But anyway, the insanity of it, which I shared already, and it's been public, that in those days, you don't see it that much now in Panama, but in those days, the police had green light to shoot you on the spot if they caught you in the commission of that crime or any crime, and they were justified by it. It wasn't no Black Lives Matter and we marching down the streets, and wasn't none of that. You done, you're dead, over, Roger, and out. And so most of my friends growing up in Santa Cruz and other hoods, because, you know, by me being in and out of the juvenile system a lot, I made a lot of ties with dudes from different hoods in the city. And so it wasn't just in my hood where police was just killing kids, you know, for committing crimes. It was everywhere. And most of my dudes, they died before the age of 18. They got killed by the police. Back then, it wasn't us killing each other that much as it is now in Panama. But now, this shit down here is a whole different level. Yeah. We killing like flies down here now because now, you know, there's access to weapons. They have cartel activity going on. This is cartel land down here. You know what I mean? Straight up. And so everything has changed. Everything has evolved. But Santa Cruz, that's where it all started as far as, you know, the crew that came to be known as La Banda in the States. And once again, we're not glorifying, but it is what it is. We can't get around for who we was, which determines who we are and where we're going.
Right. Hey, before we skip on, because I'm going to my line of question. Ain't no questions that I wrote down. It's the memories of what you done told me in the book. So I'm going along that line because I know you got some other things in the oven that go along that. So I'm asking these questions along that line. But before we move on, what was some of the juvenile joints you went in? What was the name of those places? And, you know, how were those places?
So in those days, it was mainly two in the city.
Hold on, let me see if I can remember the name of one. Is one of them called La Coya or La what?
No, Coiba was an island for adults, which no longer exists. Now it's a tourist attraction. It was like a Alcatraz looking type situation where you on this island, and you know that's the prison. The prison's on the island. But that was the adult system. You asked me about the juvenile thing, right? On the juvenile, they had like the regular joints for juveniles where they had like a dorm and everybody had their beds and stuff like that. And then they had another one. That one was called Tribunal Titular de Menores. That means like a tribune for minors. If I had to translate, that's the best translation I could give you from Spanish to English for that. And then they had another one where it was like a boarding school for boys that we consider incorrigible. And what the system would do is when you became a resident in the regular juvenile facilities, they would send you to that joint because in that joint they had like trade schools and stuff like that. And you had to stay there, and then after a while you earn your weekend passes and stuff like that. So they sent me over there a couple of times. I always ran away. Yeah, I ain't just at that time I ain't had time for just sitting in no shit like that. They ain't had no police or no guns. I was out of there. And we all used to do that shit. You know, my mom used to take my ass right back up there and put me back in the joint. You know, I put her through so much, bro. But yeah.
Yeah, so I don't want to give up too much of your story, so I ain't gonna take you through all the little Santa Cruz stories. Yeah. We got to hold something, bro, because I mean, you ain't doing nothing illegal no more. You're gonna have to capitalize off your past. So
yeah,
we're gonna skip through that. I'm gonna take you here. This was a very interesting story, and I wrote a lot about it in the fictional story I told about you. So anybody who don't know, when you read this book, and we need to promote this book, Money Ain't Everything, is written by me, but it's based on the accounts of the newspaper reports on him, and we know how the newspaper is, and it's based on court records of him. So it's not no confirmation that he did or didn't do anything. Is the story that I wrote on his life based on what the court documents say. But with that being said, Pete, you know, that's to protect you from anything over here in the United States. But I thought it was fascinating. I'm gonna use the word fascinating. I thought it was a fascinating story of how you got into the United States from, you know, the trunk of the car to Canada, the blase. And in my mind, when I visualized writing the book and the screenplay that would later come out, you know, under you, you know, I envisioned it as like a, you know, and we could go into this later. A lot of people don't understand that you have a, you know, a strong West Indian population over there. So people that look black, that are black, let me say they are black. You could correct me if I'm wrong. And then you have people that look more of what we interpret as Spanish or Migo, which is actually disrespectful. But that's what we say when we was growing up over here. But anyway, we can get into that later. But can you take me through how you left Panama and how you got to New York?
So it goes back to Santa Cruz again, right? So the original leader of our crew in the state was a brother named Julio Guerrero. Everybody knew him as Julito or Gaddafi.
I know.
Yeah, very, very brilliant brother. He was what I would consider like a ghetto superstar, you know, because he was notorious in what he did in Panama. He kind of like was kind of outstanding. So he was older than us, than most of my counterparts. So him and another one of our comrades that was part of our team named Rigo, they was the first one to migrate to the States. And they went to the States under another big homie that was older than them, named Poli, that was doing the thing in New York and Brooklyn. Them dudes had a serious operation going on up there. When we talk about serious operation, we're talking about a lot of money. And so they was under him. When Julito and them became independent and started their own team, they started to recruit guys from my generation, which are a little younger than them, to come up and be part of the team. I was the last one to find out, and I was the first one to come up, right? I just came home from doing my first and only adult bid here in Panama, and my bros, Pimpo and Solito Pete and all these other brothers that was part of my team, I could say my family, they're like, yo, we're going up there, we're going to do this. I mean, I'm down, I'm going too. And long story short, we had this lady that what she did was she made the arrangements for us to travel. Yeah.
How old were you at this time? 19?
20. Yeah, I was 20. I was 20 years old. And so this lady, she made arrangements for us to travel. And so it was kind of like, it was, on one hand, it was official, and on one hand, it was a scam. Right? They've been scamming since the Western, I think, the scams been going on. But so what it was is we were supposed to travel to Canada because in those days, you didn't require a visa to fly to Canada. And then from Canada, I was supposed to cross the border through Niagara Falls to a contact that she had over there that was also supposed to be working in immigration. And she gave us some passport size pictures to memorize the people's faces and stuff. And when we got over there, those people didn't exist. So we was on our own. When I say we, I traveled by myself, but I met another kid that she also did the paperwork for him. So when we was on the plane, we said, okay, we had something in common. So we kind of like started like getting together and, you know, talking and strategizing and stuff. So when we got there, we got off the plane, they sent us to our respective immigration officers, sat at the desk and started asking off questions. They, once they realized we was from Panama, they was like, okay, look, we won't separate y'all. We taking y'all from everybody. And they took us in the back. I said, okay, shit, we it's on now. So they took us in the back and they started asking us a bunch of questions independently, separately. And my mother had traveled a lot. I traveled with my mother a few times prior to that. So my mother told me this may happen or may not happen. And she kind of schooled me on how to address some of these questions. And I did them just like she asked me to. You know, I told them, you know, I came there on vacation and I was there for the Montreal Expo. Long story short, the other guy that sent them back because I guess they wasn't convinced with his reasoning for coming. They didn't believe that he was there for vacation because from the onset, they suspected that we came to try to cross the border because a lot of that was going on. Not like we see today, but it was still going on. But my story was so strong and I had my shit in order. So they had to release me and trust that I'll come back in 2 weeks and board a plane and go back home after my vacation time was up. So I was released. Everything that was promised to me about somebody waiting for me and all that was a lie. So I'm on my own in Canada, in Toronto, 20 years old. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. They released me. I walk out the airport with one grip, $800 in my pocket. A Lincoln Continental stops in front of, you know how cabs come up. You need a cab? You need a cab? So Lincoln Continental put up and he said, taxi. I said, taxi? I never seen no Lincoln Continental. There's no taxi in Panama. So I'm thinking all type of conspiracy theories. I'm thinking that immigration might have sent him to, you know how the man, might have sent him to kind of see if I tell the truth about what my real intentions are in Canada and stuff like that.
So as an illegal, you enter the country suspicious.
Exactly. So I got into the car. And he says, all right, so where you going? I spoke English already because of the West Indian background that later on we could talk about. And he said, where you want to go? I said, take me to the cheapest hotel in Canada, in Toronto. He said, okay. He said, what do you consider cheap? I said, $30, $40 a day. He said, that don't exist here. He said, cheap here is like $70 a day. That's not even including your food. And if you got to make phone calls to the US, stuff like that. I said, all right, take me, no problem. So then we were driving, he stopped at a light and he turned around and he said, let me ask you something. What is it you really trying to do here, right?
What nationality is this person?
He from Pakistan. That was my man named Albert. We eventually became real close friends.
I wrote about him. I used his real name.
Yeah, Albert. Yeah, from Pakistan. And he asked me, what was I really trying to do? And I realized I felt this vibe like I could trust him. So I told him, I said, look, my intention is to go to the US. I got some home here in New York. They're waiting for me. I just need somewhere where I could rest my head, get my things organized, and cross the border. If it's about money, that's not an issue. They got it. He said, all right. He said, look, this is what I'm going to do for you. I know what it is to migrate to a country like that. I came here 15 years ago on my own. And this is what I'm going to do for you. I am going to let you stay in my house. I'm going to charge you $20 a day. But you got to pay for your US phone calls. I said, wow. It's all right, cool. Wow, beautiful. And I thought, this was a regular cab driver. He owned the thing. He just come out and drive sometime at night because he bored. And his wife was a professor in the university in Pakistan. So she was in Pakistan. So he was home, he was bored. So sometimes he come out and he drive just to meet people and, do something. And when we went to his house, it was a house. It was a house. And I walked in and he said, wow. I said, man, thanks, man. And so I stayed with him. There's more to that story, but we're going to save some of that. I wound up staying with him and his cousin. His cousin was a major player, from Pakistan as well. And they kind of fell in love with me, right? Because I saw this kid traveling by himself, and the way I kept it so real and gully with them about what my true intentions were in the US, they were like, yo, we want this kid. They wanted me to stay there with them. But I wanted to go. So I stayed there for 2 months, and long story short, we talked a few connections to try to cross me over. And one thing didn't lead to the next. It didn't work out. They said, you know what? We're going to do this. They put me in the trunk of that Lincoln Continental, and we crossed the border at Niagara Falls. 5 minutes later, they pull over to the shoulder. They said, welcome to America, homie. Get out the car. Let's go. We're going to take it to the airport. They took me to a little shuttle thing up there in Buffalo, New York. And I caught a little small flight to LaGuardia. That was it.
Boom. You was in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I didn't come in no banana boat. That's the stereotype of banana boat. No, I came with style. I came in the trunk of an American-made vehicle. A Lincoln.
All right, so
That-
boom,
Some of
we in
that
Brooklyn.
Scarface banana bullshit.
Yeah. Understood. You came into Lincoln. Let's get that
Yeah,
straight. Right.
American made. American made.
American made. Yeah, that's a statement. You was here to be here.